Good morning. I'm Chaplain Ryan Rupe. I'm going to lead you through Canonicity for 4 weeks. Before we begin, let's pray. Dear God, our Heavenly Father, thank you for this day to come together here at Hope Lutheran Church. So this is your church, your body of believers in Christ. We pray that the things that we learn today, the worship that we participate in, would strengthen our hearts and souls, knowing that we are forgiven and loved children of God through the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. We remember those who couldn't make it here today, who may be ill or maybe at work and can't be with us. We ask that you bless them and keep them, and lead all of us around the world who worship Christ. We pray that you strengthen them and that help us to be lights to those who don't know you, so that the angels in heaven can rejoice, knowing that people repent and believe in Christ and become part of the body of Christ. We thank you for your word that edifies our souls. We thank you for the fellowship and the worship that we had today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'm Chaplain Ryan Rupe. I'm a chaplain here in Hope, Virginia. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm from Milwaukee. We're the wagon room on the way west. What? Further north? Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I educated at Ripon College and then St. Louis Seminary, and where I got my master's and my doctorate. And I've been an chaplain for 15 years already. That's amazing. I was a parish pastor in a place called Pearland, Texas, which is just south of Houston, where I was the associate pastor. Then 9/11 came and the war started. I volunteered for active duty. Yada yada. Hope Lutheran Church, 2016. So I am the airline chaplain, which means I take care of the chaplains that are on the aircraft carriers and the air wings here on the East Coast, and their clerks call us. Their programs on the East. So I'm going to take you through canonicity for 4 weeks. How we got the Bible that we've got now. That's a really big subject. Next week I'll have some projections. I'll put some papyrus and some stones and some other cool stuff. I think it's cool on the board here. I'll be here afterwards for a little while, answer some questions as well. I've got a big, it's not very large, but there's a big poster in the back. It's a really good timeline and has some other stuff on it. If you want to refer to it afterwards, after Bible study today. But how do we get ancient scripts? It's a great question. How do we know, for example, that Caesar Augustus? How do we know what Caesar Augustus did when he was the first emperor of Rome, the Princeps of Rome, from 31 BC to 14 AD? Well, he wrote about it. He wrote it in stone. If you go near Ankara, Turkey, and you go to this big Roman fort, you'll see on this what they call the rostra his accomplishments. He wrote his own biography right around 14 AD, just before he died, about what he thought he did. He talked about building buildings. He talked about people he conquered. He talked about making peace. It's all there, and it's written in stone. If you go there, you can literally read on the rostra, I did this and this and this, and it's been copied through the empire, and that will stay for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Luckily, we have something like that in stone that we can read. So we're very sure that Caesar Augustus did that. We know also from other things, like what the Parthians wrote when they were fighting him, and what Tacitus wrote, and what Suetonius wrote later on, that these things all strengthened the history of what Caesar Augustus did. That's one example. And I use that example, one, because Caesar Augustus is really one of the centers of ancient history, and his reign comes right around the birth of Jesus Christ. His successor, Tiberius, who was from 14 to 37 AD, is emperor when Jesus is crucified, when Jesus is raised from the dead, and when Jesus ascends to heaven. And he's emperor when Christianity begins to push out. Well, we know all about Tiberius. We know all about his military campaigns in Germany. We know about how crazy he got and how he lived his last 10 years in the island of Capri, which is really sweet, so I went here with Capri. I can see why he stayed there for 10 years and didn't want to leave. But we know all that stuff because people wrote about it. He talked about it, but we have transcripts of what he was saying. We have transcripts of what the Senate was saying at the time. We have transcripts of what historians afterwards said. So, when you look at things like when you raise a ship off the island of Sicily, and they still do this, not every day, but lots of days. We just raised a Phoenician ship off the island of Sicily. There was a giant battle there between the Romans and the Carthaginians, people that lived in modern-day Tunisia, they really had 100 years before. It's called the Three Punic Wars. But this one Punic ship was just raised, and on the bow of it, it says, we dedicate, basically that's paraphrasing, we dedicate this to our god Baal, that this ship would make a big hole in a Roman ship. That's what it says. No, Baal, we know Baal. We read about him in the Old Testament. He's all around the Old Testament. Why? He's a very powerful fertility god. People jump around, they cut themselves, they scream and yell, and they cut themselves with the blood on the ground to get Baal to start working. Back then you had gods, you did stuff to motivate gods to do things. That's why the Romans would make offerings like to Mars. They put votive offerings down to get Mars to help them in battle. Luckily for us, our God kind of works differently. He just does stuff and tells us what he's doing. And we thank him for it. But, here we are. We have a ship that talks about Baal. Well, we can go to 1 Kings and look at, remember when Elijah fought the prophets of Baal? Remember that? And they had the two offerings, the one at cattle on the one side for Baal, and then Elijah had the other one. And then he makes the prophets, circle around all day, and it doesn't work. And he goes, maybe your God is sleeping, maybe he's going to the bathroom, maybe he's traveling. This is what he said, you're reading in the Old Testament. And Baal ends up being the god north of Israel, in a place called Tyre. Tyre becomes a great seafaring city. Well, Tyre, they go out to Africa and to Cadiz, Spain, and they form the Carthaginian Empire. The Carthaginians were followers of Baal. That's where you get the ship that fights the Romans. We have evidence, lots of it, about who was worshiping Baal. That helped us understand 1 Kings 17. Things like that are connected through history and archaeology. Every day we find stuff like this. Not every day, but most days. In our coins, in people digging things up, pulling up ships, pulling up pieces of rock that have inscriptions on it. That's how we know Pontius Pilate. Part of the reason we know Pontius Pilate existed is because he made a big stone to Tiberius, talking about how great Tiberius was. We don't know what happened to Pontius Pilate, by the way, after he was crucified. Christ, we know he was recalled to Rome, but we don't know much after. But we do know, based on that stone, what he's seen. So, so things like the Persian Empire, we've been talking about Daniel. We know all kinds of stuff about the Persians because of the archaeology and what's written on stone and what's written in some codexes, some books that we still have. So how do we get to 66 here in the 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament? Especially when you consider things like Star Wars came out when I was 7. Everything I do is basically based on Star Wars and The Simpsons, so I apologize for Star Wars. That's all I know. That's all I got. Besides the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's all I got. But so I was 7, or about 7 when it came out. My first thought was, when I first saw the Star Destroyer come through, I thought, how'd they get the camera in space? I didn't know. Darth Vader was very scary. My family were harsh anti-communists, so I just thought Darth Vader was like Brezhnev or something coming down, and the communists were going to get us, and the Empire was the same thing. Well, anyway, so 20 years later, now I'm an adult, and I'm watching the new Star Wars with my wife in the theater in St. Louis, and they changed a few things. What was that? Change Star Wars? It's like telling John Wayne to change. You just can't do it, But things did change, and you got to notice, right? And big fans did notice. There were things like when Darth Vader picks up the Emperor and he goes, "No!" And you're like, he didn't say that in the first one. That's terrible. But it is a change. So, what happens when in 1947 a shepherd in Engedi, Israel, near the Dead Sea, is messing around. He's just going through different caves, and he throws a rock, and he hears a clink. And he goes in and he finds these jars full of paper, full of scrolls, a whole truckload of them, from 2,000 years before, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Almost the entire Old Testament preserved for almost 2,000 years. Pretty soon they figured out, hey, holy smoke, look at this. Tested, sure enough, it's from a group of basically Old Testament desert monks that followed the scenes. And they started unrolling, hey, we can look at this. Let's look at Isaiah. Let's look at our modern Isaiah, and lo and behold, the spot-on match. Very close. Very close. Not changed much at all. That's a big issue. You know, how much has it changed? You know, is what we say, what we read now, reliable to what the words of Christ were, to what Moses was talking about, to what Elijah was doing when the prophets have failed? Because remember, you know, when you're a New Testament apostle, or you're Jesus and you're walking around, when Jesus says things like, from the blood of righteous Abel, Genesis chapter 2, to the blood of Zechariah, he's saying the beginning of the Old Testament to the end. Because Zechariah, the blood of righteousness, the temple, that's the last part of Chronicles. In the Hebrew way of doing the Old Testament, Chronicles is always last, not like ours. So he's saying from first to last. And he starts quoting. He's using what is the Testament. Remember, there's no New Testament at the time. He is quoting what we know now to be true, based on history, archaeology, all of these things. It's really, really cool. Jesus, you know, okay, what about the flood? You know, Jesus in Luke 17 says that the flood came and killed them all. You know, only 8 were left, as he says. But wait, the flood didn't exist. Well, if the flood didn't exist, that means Jesus is a liar. He's quoting the Old Testament. He's quoting something that did happen. C.S. Lewis said in his famous, what he calls a trilemma argument, he says, Jesus is either a lunatic, a liar, or Lord. There's a lot of lunatics that say, hey, I'm the Son of God. You know, they're crazy. Some people are crazy. Or he's a liar, saying, I just made this stuff up. Or he's Lord. There's only 3 options. And it's really cool to show the divine majesty of Jesus just by simply watching him quote the Old Testament. By quoting Genesis 6, 7, 8, 9, where God killed everybody but 8 people in a flood. You know, that's incredible. Because that same water that rolls down the Jordan River is the same that Jesus is baptized in, is kind of the same water that God uses to kill unrighteous people. That's a big subject, but that's a sidebar. But you see what I'm saying? They're using the Testament that had been handed down to them, and then 2,000 years later, it's handed down to us. To us. So we'll get to that. You know, it's interesting. I mean, before 1455, before the printing press, Johann Gutenberg's first book was the Bible, the Vulgate Bible. Bibles, or books in general, were very rare. People didn't read much, but you went to the library, the books were chained to the desk. You know, you couldn't take a Bible out. That'd be pretty tough, you know. I mean, we're Americans, we can do what we want. You know, give me that Bible. No, you get in trouble. You literally couldn't take my Bible because it took a year to copy. It took a year to copy to make sure that it was right. So Luther, when he's reading, you know, when he's reading in the early 1500s, he is becoming the beneficiary of the thousands and thousands of Bibles that are finally coming off the press. Huge, huge importance. And it was Latin, you know, for years, from Jerome's Vulgate in the 400s till 1500. If you wrote a Bible in another language, you got in trouble. Tyndale, who wrote English Bible, was burned at the stake. A guy named John Wycliffe, he was actually the first guy to write the English Bible. The Pope got so mad at him that he killed him twice. He was already dead, so they dug him up and threw his bones like in the river. He was so mad at him. That's really bad, somebody, you know. How are you doing down there? You know, just the power of the word. You know, and of course for the Pope, once the printing press is made and the Bible's in German and in English, and people can start reading it like we do, things really, really change for, I would say, for the better. So, all right. So let's look at, so today we're going to look at just an introduction to canonicity. I know I'm going to bring up a lot of different stuff. Canonicity is basically a word, it's a reed. A canon in the Old Latin is a reed. It's all we use to measure something with. That becomes a word for, words change their meanings, of course. Canonicity, the word canon is first a measuring stick, but it becomes a word for standard or norm. Something that's a measure, something that everything else is measured with. So a canon in the Scripture is kind of the norm of what we think is God's divine word. So when we talk about the canon, we're talking about the standard or norm of what God's word is. That's what canon is. That's why it's important too. Because there are other books out there like the Apocrypha that the Catholic, our brothers in the Catholic Church use. Are they part of the canon? We'll get into that too. What did the early church think of these things? Where does the Septuagint come in? This is the Greek Old Testament. After the Jews were dispersed by the Babylonians and the Persians, they ended up all through what is now Iran, Iraq, Italy, Spain, but heavy in Alexandria, Egypt. There was a huge Jewish population in Alexandria. They couldn't read Hebrew. The rabbis were really afraid that their lay people wouldn't be able to read the Old Testament. So what do? You write it in a language that they're speaking, and that's Greek in Alexandria. Because of Alexander the Great, he formed the city, and he formed it as a Greek colony. That's the Septuagint. And that's the book that Paul's talking. He's quoting the Septuagint. When he's quoting the Old Testament, Paul is using the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. And it's an interesting take on that. So, because a lot of people don't speak Hebrew. So, what are the meanings of words? How do they change? Like for instance, when Jesus says to his disciples after he resurrects, he says, "Hagar, child." Well, in ancient Greek, that means kid that you're teaching. But in Canonical Greek, when Jesus is around, it means more like here that I'm teaching. That's a different issue. How then do I translate that? When I'm talking to you and trying to tell you what the words of Jesus mean. And how then does the translator, what's word the translator that has in English in 21st century to make it right? Luckily, we have 19,000 fragments, and we can judge all these things on it and figure it out and do the best that we can. So it's a standard, a rule. It becomes a word for list. Canon becomes a word for list, so you can see why we use it better. It's the list of our books. There are different ways to number it. The Old Testament, I would say by really 400 BC by 200 BC is really locked in. We're very sure that the Old Testament as we know it was in the temple, being used in divine worship all through the time Christ was ministering on earth, and was probably there when the temple burned down in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed it, when a guy named Titus came in and blew the place away and knocked it down brick by brick. That's why if you go, of course, the Wailing Wall is the last part of what we call the Second Temple. Titus destroyed the rest, and probably that's again the Jewish community scattered. They actually revolt again in 130 AD, and the Romans throw everybody out that are Jews. That's the first time you use the word alien Palestine. It's the word Palestine comes from. The Emperor Hadrian says this is Palestina. This is a place that we are renaming, and he puts the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus right there. Jupiter is the senior god in the Roman Empire. You always put Optimus Maximus on top. You go to Rome, that was their main temple. But he's saying, look, our religion is better than yours. But that forces the Jews then to go all over the place and take their Old Testament Hebrew and their Septuagint with them. And again, and things like the Essenes are putting things in jars, so hopefully they would think the generations will come and read them later. All right. So we think that, how was it collected? When was it started to be written? Well, Moses, we've always believed since before the early church, that Moses wrote the first 5 books. The Pentateuch, the first 5, probably around 1400 BC. We don't know exactly when the Hebrews came out of Egypt. There's a lot of debate about this. There's 2 main dates. One is around 1400 BC. There's a lot of evidence for that, based on lots of other archaeological, historical evidence. So 1400 BC to about 400 BC, that's when the Old Testament books are collected. They're put together. Ezra is putting them together. And again, they're in circulation throughout the Jewish world from then on. And again, they're circulated in Hebrew and then in the Septuagint in Greek by 150 BC and are in common use in worship as well in Jewish circles. The New Testament, we know it's done by 100 AD. John writes Revelation, or he has a revelation, he has a vision of one revelation on the island of Patmos, exiled there by a really mean guy named Domitian. Domitian was a maniac. Didn't like Christians at all. Well, he didn't like anybody. Domitian, was it Domitian that actually cut the head off an ostrich in front of the senators and threatened them? That's a different story. That was either him or Commodus. Commodus the same way, by the way. Commodus, the guy from movie Gladiator, the son of Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. Commodus was actually like that, by the way. He used to fight in the gladiatorial games, and no emperor ever did that. But Domitian exiled John, and while he was there, he wrote Revelation. Well, we know Domitian was emperor until December 31st, 96 AD. We know that day because the Praetorian Guard murdered him. And Nerva took over. Nerva returned John then to Ephesus, where he was bishop. We know that from early church sources. So, Revelation is done by December 31st, 96 AD. It had to be. And then thrown into the canon sometime later. When were the Gospels written? Well, certainly before 70 AD. Why 70? Well, the church, or the temple in Jerusalem, is destroyed. Jerusalem is destroyed. And if you read, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, especially the Synoptics, they're talking about what's going to happen in the temple. They're predicting what's going to happen. Well, that obviously happened then before the temple was destroyed. They would have talked about it had it already happened, but it hadn't yet. And it really, remember, it scared the apostles. They're like, how can you destroy a temple that's beautiful? This is the God's seat on earth. Well, Jesus is changing the nature of the game. So Paul's writing the epistles. There are other letters written. And of course, there's thousands of probably other letters that were circulating around the church that didn't make it into the canon. But the ones that we know, what we consider the 27, are done by 100 AD, and they're in common use. By 150 AD, most of what we use as the canon is being commonly referred to, especially the Gospels. The Gospels were part of church worship from the very earliest days, and it's interesting too because there are clues, evidences that even certain things are, like Paul writes if you read Philippians, and he gets into Philippians 2 and he talks about Jesus who by being nature became a slave that he be resurrected. We think that's like the earliest Christian hymn. He's actually quoting from him because it's not him talking. You can tell he's quoting because it's not his style. So there are hymnodies already talking about the worship of Jesus as the Son of God, as divine, which of course is the whole point of the gospel, to show Jesus as the Son of God, as God himself. As Mark says, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The very first verse of Mark, or John, of course, chapter 1. In the beginning, so of course you're looking at in the beginning of Genesis 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then verse 14, and he became flesh and dwelt among us. Priceless words from the gospel. Words that bound the Christian church together. The first confession of the Christian church is Jesus is Lord. So you can see how in the Gospels it surrounds that idea, because you see that all through. And then, of course, things like Romans become integral then to continually understand not only what it means to be a Christian, but what it means to have a Christian life. And our relationship then to our neighbors who may not be Christian, or neighbors who are. Stuff like that. You get things like Corinthians. Corinthians is just wild. I mean, Corinth is a port city that is a very wealthy city, has all the cults there. Jupiter, Aeschylus, Mars, Athena, Artemis, they're all there. There's temple prostitution, there's all kinds of bad stuff going on. And you have a small band of Christians there. How does Paul then write to them to talk to them about what it means to be a Christian and how to act? And what's interesting too is he says in 1 Corinthians, in the book of 1 Corinthians, he goes, in my former letter, I was telling, well, we don't have that one. Where is it? I mean, I'd love to find that first letter. I can't find it anywhere. It's gone. It's lost. But he'd already been writing it. So we know that 1 Corinthians is probably either at least his second letter that he wrote to them. You know, if not more. He probably wrote a lot more, as people wrote by letter to Rome. Another good example of what they call the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome, is that you have a postal service. You have ways to get things back and forth. The Persian Empire had a really good postal service where we get our creed for the Arabian notes for the Persians. They actually had horses and they sent posts across the empire to bind it together. Well, Paul is a beneficiary of that too. He could send letters everywhere in the Roman Empire and have a reasonable chance of getting where they want to go. And again, that permeates then the church. All right, our Bible is written in 3 languages. Original Hebrew. Most of the Old Testament's in Hebrew. Some of it's in Aramaic. If you watch The Passion of the Christ, with Mel Gibson's movie, it's all in Aramaic. Very similar to Hebrew. Not a very close cousin of Hebrew. And then, of course, the New Testament is almost all in Greek, in what they call Canonical Greek. So when you go to the seminary, they make you learn Hebrew, Canonical Greek, and you read it in its original language. Again, that produces, when you're very sure you have good, solid, old copies, maybe you have, we found a fragment of John 18, which is really, really old. I think it's 110 AD, just a small paper fragment. That's a really, the older the better. We can look at it in Greek and say, oh, we can translate that one verse. And by the way, there's no verses until just several hundred years ago. There were no verses for the first, well after 1000 AD. So you're just looking and trying to figure out what this is. It doesn't say John chapter 18, like we have now. And you get chapter breaks later as well. So not only do you have, in terms of a modern, how we understand things as modern people, but you have to bring it out of the freight of its own language and apply it evenly and credibly to here. Do it right. Do honor to that text. That ain't easy. I'll give you an example that I think illustrates the point. If you use a Living Bible, which is a paraphrase Bible, then all Bibles are solid. I generally wouldn't use a Living Bible, and I'll give you an example why I would use it. Because in Acts chapter 2, in the Greek it says, and the apostles went up to pray. Okay, roger that. But in the Living Bible it says, and the apostles, they all went up for a prayer meeting. No, that's not what it says. It says they all went up to pray. See, the author's putting his theology in it a little bit, and she needs to back off. It doesn't change it too much, but it changes it enough where you're not as true to the text as you want to be. So things like that, we want to be careful. Question?
Was it initially Apocrypha?
Yeah.
So does that include the Gospels or the Gospels out there? Or another category that's sort of floating around for
the Apocrypha, strictly speaking, is a list of books that the Roman Catholic Church uses as authoritative that were made around what we call the intertestamental period. But we say Luther would say they're good for edification, they're good to read. Like if you read Tobit, Tobit is good for people that are about to be married. It's a good marriage story. But it fails what we call the threefold test. That it's apostolic, that it was around when the apostles were there to witness it, to see it, that it's Catholic in the sense of a small c, that it's universal, that it's around the entire church, and that it's Orthodox. It doesn't talk about the death and resurrection of Jesus in any way that continues to push the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. So we exclude it from the canon because it fails that threefold test. Whereas the Catholic Church, since 1460, has said, or 1560, sorry, the Council of Trent said, this is part of the canon, it is authoritative, it should be part of it. Before that, the Catholic Church never said anything about it. Jerome just threw it in as extra. It's kind of a back part of the text, just some extra things to read, but it is not part of the canon. It never was until 1560. So the Catholic Church is actually saying it's canonical only in more of what we call a recent tradition. So that it's Orthodox, that and that's point. I've got it here somewhere. Number 7, that there's this canonical criteria. There's lots of things like the Shepherd of Hermas or Tobit. These are things that you read, if you pick up a Catholic Bible, you'll see them. They're in there, they're good stories, but they failed that threefold test. Luther, when he wrote the German New Testament in 1530, when he finished the Bible in 1534, he put the Apocrypha in the back as extra identifying thing, but he made clear that he did not consider it part of the canon. And that's, again, it's what separates us from our Roman Catholic brothers, is what we see as canonical and what we don't. Yeah.
Well, they also hold that same status in Hebrew canon, that they're good books.
Right.
They're edifying.
Right.
But they're not.
That's
they
right.
Don't have authority, doctrinal authority,
Right.
like the Hebrew canon.
Right. Yeah, and again, the Council of Trent, which was like a 15-year council after the Lutheran Reformation, basically defined what the Roman Catholic Church believes, teaches, and confesses. And this is one thing that really ends up widening the divide between us, because we don't accept that, but we use them. I mean, if you read Romans, you just read, say, a book like Romans, and then you read Tobit, you think you're reading the Bible, and then you think you're reading a novel, and that's fine. These are good stories, but I mean, I read Eusebius all the time, ancient Christian historian. He's a great storyteller, he's a great writer, and I believe what he's saying, but it's not part of the canon. So, and these are things that we will talk about. So let's see. All right. So the Old Testament, written on stone, talked about that already. Stone. You see it on stone tablets, which of course, as long as the stone doesn't break, you can watch it forever. I mean, Pontius Pilate. I'll have to get that Pontius Pilate stone next week. Maybe the Caesar Augustus one too. A lot of times, where we really get a lot of stuff is what we call amphora, clay amphora, which is a pot. The Romans were notorious wine drinkers. I mean, they drank wine like people in Milwaukee drink beer. I mean, we drank a lot. And we find amphora, these clay amphora, everywhere throughout the Roman Empire and well beyond. We find clay amphora in India. They were trading the folks in India loved Roman wine. I don't blame them. I love Italian wine too. But so they were trading through Red Sea ports. Well, a lot of those amphora have stuff on them. Hey, this belongs to Joe the barber from Alexandria. You know, in the 3rd year of Tiberius. Oh, well, so this came from. Or you go to Norway and you'll find amphora or coins. You know, this coin can only be from Caesar Augustus or from Galba in 69 AD. This had to be, here's a coin of Galba. Well, this only could have gotten here at 70 AD. It was emperor for only 2 months, then he got assassinated. So, you know, stuff like that. Good evidences for things like that. So you get it in stone, leather, you get it in clay sometimes, but you talk to a rabbi, a real, when they make special Old Testament text, it could be in vellum, which is sheepskin, which takes a long time. Right now, we have a special Old Testament being made for the USS Gerald Ford from vellum. And there's special rabbinic calligraphers who are writing it as we speak. And they're going to put it on the Ford in a couple of months, but it takes a year. You know, where right now, of course, you can read the Bible online if you want, or you can get a published Bible from a bookstore, or from Amazon, from wherever. But back then, it might take you a year to get it right. And I think that's really cool that they're going to have that vellum Bible in there for the length of the time that Gerald Ford will sail, which is approximately 50 years. Well, that vellum will last much longer. So it's imperative that the scribe do it right, and then it can be checked. And of course, we can check. He'll check each page as he does it, and then he'll stop and throw it out if it doesn't work, each page, so to make sure it's correct. So the earliest known Christian fragments, we have about, I think, maybe 19,000 fragments now. They're all over the world, and we keep finding them too. It's really cool. John, there's a point of John 18, a small part of it, from between 110 and 130 AD. I think it's in Dublin, Ireland. I'll have to double check. But it's just a small part. And to think that, what's really cool is John probably died around 100 AD. So he wrote John probably around 50 AD or so. We really don't know. But to think that people that he specifically taught were certainly alive in between 110 and 130 AD at Ephesus, where he was bishop. They had access. Can you imagine, hey John, we have a question about your gospel. Answer this question? Yeah, actually I can. I'm a witness to Jesus. My authority is accepted by the whole Catholic Universal Church, and it's Orthodox. I believe Jesus is the Son of God. So what he says goes. And you can imagine the Christian Church for the first 100 years thought Christ was coming any time. So when John dies, they're like, what do we do now? Our bishop is gone. But people like Irenaeus and Polycarp, who were his disciples, began to continue to edify the church through their writings and through the protection of the canon, and to keep it going. How do we do it on time? All right. So we talked about the Canonical Criteria. Again, Apostolic, Catholic, and Orthodox. The three things that make the Scriptures accessible to the canon. There was a lot of debate early in the church about things like Revelation and 3 John and like 2 Peter. Were they part of the canon or not? And so every once in a while you'll see Bibles from the early church where they'll have like 24 of the 27 books, or 25 of the 27. Revelation was a big sticking point because people, well, it's hard on. It's a tough book. It's got a lot of visionary material, and it could be very divisive at times. But in the end, they said, wait a minute, this is apostolic. John wrote it. It's Catholic, in that it's accepted by almost everybody in the church, and it's Orthodox in that it talks about Jesus as the Son of God in the state of exaltation. That Jesus post-crucifixion, after he's resurrected. In fact, of course, John, when he sees the Christ, he bows down. He actually bows down to the angels. He's so scared out of his wits, and that's part of that. So Revelation gets in the canon, and we're glad that it's there. Although it does still cause a lot of controversy in the Christian church as a whole. That should not preclude us from examining it and welcoming it as part of our canon. So I've already talked about number 8. The Bible is supported by a great depth of archaeological, geographical, and historical evidence. We have a whole set of books, 9 books of letters from a guy named Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger was the governor of Bithynia. He was a Roman governor of Bithynia, 112 AD. Bithynia is in central Turkey now. Now, Pliny, the emperor, was a guy named Trajan. Trajan is considered, the Romans considered him the best emperor of all. That he ran his empire very, very well. And Pliny, as governor, was appointed by Trajan. So Trajan would talk to him all the time. Hey, I want to make a fire brigade in a northern city of Turkey. Do you think I should, Emperor Trajan, do you think I should have a fire brigade? Most of us would say, that sounds like a great idea. Because fire was always happening in the ancient world. Trajan writes back and says, no, absolutely not. You don't want a bunch of young men gathering around training who aren't in the army, but they have nothing to do except fight fires. They're a danger to good order and discipline. They could end up overthrowing the governor, so don't do that. Just and we actually can see what Trajan wrote. It said, just make sure all the businessmen have all the fire equipment, so everybody knows to fight the fire. But Pliny talks about Christians. He says there's this group. They won't worship, they won't make a votive offering to the emperor. By then you have several divine emperors. Caesar Augustus is considered a god by then. So is Tiberius. So is Claudius. So is Nerva. So you have to go and make a votive offering. You got to sprinkle some incense on this little altar, and then you can go on your way. Because remember, everybody in the Roman Empire has got to do their part to satiate the gods, to motivate them so the gods would bring good favor to the Roman Empire. But of course, Christians won't do that. They'll have nothing to do with this. Jews actually got a good dispensation for this. The Roman Empire understood that Jewish members of the Roman Empire, whether they be actual citizens, like Paul, or whether they be just what we call freemen or slaves, simply could not give those offerings because they were a monotheistic culture. But most people in the Roman Empire were polytheists. They believed there were many, many gods. So they had no problem worshiping all these gods. But of course, the Jews did so. The Roman Empire said, we will not persecute you if you do not worship as we worship. But now there's these Christians. They're not going to do anything. Well, they're not Jews. And really, you got to remember, this is after 70 AD. Once the temple burns down and Titus destroys it, and takes the temple stuff, he takes all of the things from the temple, takes them to Rome for a big parade, actually, for his dad, Vespasian, who's the emperor. Once that happens, the Jewish world and the Christian world really bifurcate. They really come apart into two specific parts. There's this very distinct Jewish group and a very distinct Christian group. Now the Christians are kind of on their own. They don't look like Jews to pagan Romans. Before, I think a lot of the Romans, the governors were like, well, Christians are no different than Jews. Well, now they look different. Well, they don't have a dispensation like Jews. So Emperor Trajan, what am I supposed to do when I bring these people in for questioning? They won't recant. They won't give an offering to say Caesar Augustus is God. Are we going to kill them or what? Trajan says, don't seek them out, but if you do find them, then you need to persecute them and punish them severely because they have to be part of the team. So when we have all these letters from Pliny and talking about all these other things. So we know that, and Pliny says, yeah, they worship, they come together on Sundays, they have a holy meal together, Holy Communion, and they worship this person, Jesus, who they say was killed, and now they say is alive, and they worship him as God. Well, yeah, he's got it, doesn't he? He's close. Especially as a good pagan, he's got it. He understands what Christians are doing in Asia Minor and what we call the province of Bithynia. So we have those writings. You can go get Pliny's books. You can read them online. They're there. And that was 112 AD. So probably 12 or so years after John died as Bishop of Ephesus, which is right near Bithynia. It's right to the west of Bithynia. So, and we know there were lots of Christian congregations by 100 AD in that part of Turkey. So people are running up against the Roman authorities at the time. So, lots of historical evidence. I told you about Tyre. Tyre was the center of Baal worship. Remember, King Ahab marries Jezebel. Where is she from? North of Israel. What's she doing up there? Worshipping Baal. Not a good idea for an Israelite king to marry a Baal worshiper. But, he was in love. Love distorts your reality. What are you going to do, right? Love you. 21 years now, right? Better than the YMCA. You know where the weight room is? I'll check that. All right. Anyway, side note. But we know, like places like when Jesus heals the demon or throws the demons out of the Decapolis, northern Israel. The Decapolis are Greek cities. 10 Polish cities. 10 cities the Romans made. Caesarea Maritima, the great port of Caesarea. Herod had his seat of government for years. Herod, the one who kills the boys in the first great massacre after Jesus was born. This is where Herod is. This is where Pontius Pilate goes to relax. It makes sense. It's right on the seashore. It's very breezy there. He made a whole port city. I want to go to the beach too. It makes sense. But we know these places exist. We know exactly where they are. We know what was there, like a forum, a port. We have pictures of it. We have writings all over the place. And of course, and again, you have Jewish folks that are there. They want to be separate from Romans, who they consider pagans, and they certainly want to be separate from Greeks because they think the Greeks are really pagans. So that's why you get things like the Pharisees, by the way, who are what we call separated ones. We need to have an individual identity. So what do you do? You know, what do you do to take care of these people? So Jesus going into a place like the Decapolis, if you're a good observant Jew, you're walking along with them, you're like, man, you're going into foreign territory, man, where you going? You know, aren't you going to take care of our guys? You know, that it's, I don't even want to go in there, it's unclean. You know, I don't want to go in there, they eat pork. You know, these are serious issues for them. So how many pieces do we have? Maybe, I read a number 19,000. It's incredible how many pieces we have. But we have a lot of what we call codexes now. These are codex is basically the word for a book. It's papyrus bound together and like what we consider a modern book. The papyrus comes from the Nile region. They make it into paper. You write it in paper. You know, beforehand when you wrote it on vellum lasts a lot longer. Of course, stone lasts the most longest, but when you write it on paper, it's easy to do, but it's the first to be destroyed too. So when they were writing these codexes down, they were, you know, of course they're susceptible to fire, but they just susceptible to degeneration. Things just tend to degenerate over time quickly into paper. Of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were put in jars, and they were sealed. I don't know how exactly they were sealed, but a great environment for scrolls. They're sealed in jars, they're in a desert environment, it's dry, there's very little humidity, they had a great chance to make it. So when you go to Jerusalem, I think to the university there, where they have most of them, and they really don't let you see, you can't touch them, because they're still being examined. And how beautiful the writing is, and how close it is to the Old Testament. I think each book of the Bible, except for Esther, is in the Old Testament. So we have so much of that. And then we keep finding them. And we keep finding stuff. The 17th, 18th, and 19th century, we're finding stuff all over the place. And that we can date through carbon dating and through other examination techniques that we can date to very, very early in the Christian church. So again, the Gospels are written certainly by 70 AD. Again, remember the cutoff point is, I keep coming back to this, but to the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. The Gospels are certainly done by then, and Revelation is written by 180, and it begins to be collected as the canon there. I talked about what the relevance is in number 13, about righteous Abel to righteous Zechariah. Jesus talks in a way from beginning to, remember Luke 24? When he sees the guys on the road, he says the scriptures test the Psalms, the Proverbs, and the law, they testify to me. You know, people say, what does the Bible mean? You know, it's 1,000 pages, it's big, it's bulky. You know, when you get stuff like Jesus cursing the fig tree, or a word in Genesis like Nimrod was a mighty hunter, and you're like, what does that have to do with anything? I'm confused. Or, you know, the 7 trumpets, you're going, man, what's going on? And you think, wait, what did Jesus say in Luke 24? And what did he say throughout the Gospel? He said, the Gospel testifies to me. This is the story of the problem in the earth that Adam and Eve brought to the earth through the power of Satan, that can only be solved by God, can only be solved by Jesus Christ. It's the story of Jesus Christ is Lord. That should always be the prime thing we're looking at when we see the canon. When we go in and read it, that's what we're thinking about. That's the prime thing when we're worshiping. That's the prime thing when we're doing the liturgy. Jesus Christ is Lord. That's what we're talking about. If we're talking about other things, we're probably a little bit off, or way off. And that distinguishes the Christian church then from other people or from other churches. And so we have to respect the canon in that sense. Again, the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, that becomes the Old Testament for the early Christian church. When Paul is quoting the Old Testament, he's using the Septuagint. He's using the Greek Old Testament. But what a great thing for Jews and Christians in the early church who don't read Hebrew. They've got it. They've got it. They can read it in language, or they can have somebody read it to them. Again, Paul's a great ambassador for this, because of course he speaks and writes Hebrew. He speaks and writes Aramaic and Greek, and he's a Roman citizen. Remember when he gets beaten up, he says, "You beat up a Roman citizen," and the guy says, "Oh, you're Roman. Whoops, can't do that." That gives him all kinds of access to things that other people simply don't have. He's a great transmitter of information, verbal and written, to the Roman authorities, and certainly to his friends around the church, and to us 2,000 years later. See, Jerome in the 400th, 5th century, really kind of makes the standard, what we call the standard canon. He writes the whole Bible into Latin, and that becomes the translation. When you see the old Luther movie, 1953, Luther's an Augustinian monk, and he says, if only our people could read the Bible in their language. And the prior comes up and says, Luther, what are you talking about? Luther goes, oh, I'm sorry, Father, and what would happen if every potboy and swineherd in Germany could read in German? Luther goes, well, there'd be a lot more Christians. You know, and that's where Luther's, and then the prior goes, Latin was good enough for St. Jerome, Latin was good enough for the church, Latin will have to be good enough for you and me. Luther goes, thank you, and he walks off, right? Because you don't dare, imagine if you had a Bible for 1,000 years, the same words. You're not going to dare. But the problem is, you know, when you go to church and whether you're literate or illiterate, you go to church and it's all in Latin. You don't know what's going on, except for the sermon, which, you know, hit or miss on the sermon, right? I mean, some pastors can preach, some can't, or the pastor is drunk and he doesn't want to. I mean, this is what happened in the Renaissance and the Reformation, where you had pastors and priests that weren't very well educated, didn't take their vocation seriously. So you finally get that 5 minutes of good discussion about the scripture, and it falls flat because the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's drunk. Or you don't like him because he's impious. Well, can't I have the Bible? I want to read it. Pope said, absolutely not. And he would employ the kings of different countries. And anybody brought this up, they were always threatened with burning. Again, like I said, John Wycliffe, who writes the first Bible, they dug him up after he was already dead and threw his bones in the river. And, you know, that's a warning for everybody else. William Tyndale, they burned alive John Huss, Council. It's funny, you know, Council of Constance, by the way, 1415. There's a problem in the Roman Catholic Church, 1415. There's 3 popes. That's a problem. Well, we got to figure out who the true pope is. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we'll all meet in Constance and we'll hammer it out. Okay. Well, they finally come up with a pope. Hey, wait, we got this heretic John Huss. What should we do? Oh, since we're here, let's burn him too. You know. So they got it. All right, hey, we got to put one pope and we've got John Huss burned. So we're good. And of course, Luther, when he's starting to write these things, there's all kinds of pictures of Huss burning at the stake from 100 years before. John Huss was burned in 1415. Luther is writing from 1517 on, so almost exactly 100 years. He gets the New Testament out by 1523 in German, the same basic High German that is still used, by the way. Can you imagine what that was like? You know, you've never heard the New Testament, never heard a word of it. And now you hear, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he die, shall live. That's a pretty big matzo ball hanging out there, don't you think? You know, versus, oh man, I didn't know what was going on. I just trusted the priest to tell me what to do or what it looked for. By the way, they didn't get the wine back, they just got the bread, and then you just raced off and back home. Now you hear it for the first time. And he brings Lazarus out. You know, I love the King James, you know. But Lord, he be in the grave for 3 days, he's stinking. Oh, yeah, that sounds very human, you know. And he's like, and he says, come on out. And he comes out, you know. What was that like, by the way? You know, he talked about that in the sermon this morning. For those of you who weren't there, I don't mean to spoil it, but you know, that's to me one of the great testimonies of Jesus in his ministry, raising Lazarus from the dead. Because the Pharisees want to kill Lazarus too afterwards. You know, it says they had dinner together afterwards. They ate together. What was that like? Are they Arby's? They have the meats. You know, what? Now, what are you talking about? See, you were dead. Yeah, you got better. Good for you. A foretaste of the feast to come. When we sit down in the old liturgy, that's what we're talking about. That binds you together. The canon binds you then with people like Lazarus. You can say, Lazarus is raised from the dead. I'm going to be raised from the dead. I'm going to live in a new creation. I don't know what that's like. But I trust the Word, the physical Word, right? I trust the Word of life, Jesus himself. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. You know, it's not just some abstract thing. If you read the Quran, it's a bunch of sayings of Muhammad, but there's no history. It's just a bunch of sayings. There's no archaeology. There's no history. It just goes on and on and on. Ours is wrapped in these things, and it concerns the idea of God coming to earth, coming in flesh. It's so different. It's a different kind of way to look at what God does. If you're in the Roman Empire, again, you as a person in the Roman Empire get that God's motivated to be benevolent to you by doing offerings, by sacrificing, by doing these things. We say God breaks his own bones for us. He breaks his own life for us. He destroys sin and death for us, or we die and go to hell. That's the word of Christ. That's the canon. That's what we do. That's what we believe. And that's, we hope we stand on then what Paul was talking about, his understanding of the Septuagint and his understanding of the Gospels. So that binds us then together. How many Bible copies are there? As of 2009, 6 billion. That's a whole lot. Lots of translations. Number 2, who can guess what's number 2? It's another, what I would call a kind of religion. It's not really a religion, but it is a kind of religion. It's Mao's writings, 900 million strong. Since Marxism is basically a religion of the self, it takes God away and replaces him with man, and replaces his virtue with a constructed virtue that Marx talks about. Mao is 900 million and growing for copies, not even close.
Little Red Book.
Little Red Book, yeah, so they only killed 100 million people, so they're good. That false religion is working out. But it's a different way of looking at things. The Bible, it says God's word doesn't return vacant. It's all over the place. It's all over the world. It's all over the world. And of course, it's all in the net too. You can get it on the net as well. But it permeates our very lives. I can't stress enough. 1455. I remember in 2000 they had the most important people of the millennium. Luther was near the top. Isaac Newton, of course, near the top. But Johann Gutenberg, near I think number 2 or number 3. I think Newton was number 1. But the printer can't say enough about this. You go from just a few thousand texts of all kinds in Europe in 1455 to, by 1500, you have tens of thousands of texts. Presses are getting proliferating. You can see the church and the kings also, they want to control the presses because they knew not only you get books, but you get pamphlets too. Luther was a prolific writer. He would just write, a 10-page thing on something that was going on, and also you make 10,000 copies of it, and it proliferates. You go into a town, and there's one, and you read it, and you know what to do. Hey, the prince is doing this, and we should obey this tax or do this, and you read it for the first time. It would never happen 100 years ago. So you can argue that the Reformation would have never happened without the printing press. I think that's right. Yes.
Well, in particular, Luther's 95 Theses hung up on the Wittenberg church door. That was all the further he intended that to go.
Right.
Someone took it down, took it to a
That's
printer, and started cranking out copies, and then put the original back up.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where the whole explosion began.
That's
if
right.
it stayed on the door, it would have been an internal church controversy,
That's right.
a big deal. But the printing press made everybody aware
That's right.
of Luther poking.
And again, Luther wanted the Catholic churches to talk about indulgences and some other things. As Luther said in the 95 Theses, if the Pope can release souls from purgatory for money, why couldn't he do it out of pure Christian charity? In the old Luther movie, Pope Leo goes, "What drunken German wrote that?" He doesn't have the power anymore, right? Because a Christian man is going to go, that's right. If you have the right to release my grandfather from purgatory, you should go ahead and do it. And that changed the face of the planet. That was 500 years ago next year, Halloween. So we will celebrate that with vigor as Lutherans, because that's how we roll. It is 11:15. It's time to go. Depart in peace.